John Crawley is the high performance director of team sports at the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And I would consider him a coaching expert, but not only coaching, but a performance expert, meaning all things to do with developing performing athletes, teams, cultures. And he's a wealth of knowledge. And so we're very grateful and fortunate to have him with us tonight.
Thanks for all of you for jumping on and spending part of your Friday evening with us. As Drew and John both said, what I want to do is really make this interactive. And I certainly want you to take away some things tonight that you can incorporate immediately into your coaching practice, and you can actually take on the pool deck the next time you get together with your team. So to me, coaching is all about doing. We sit in enough meetings and we watch enough presentations online that sometimes it can get a little bit numbing. Coaching is about doing. It's not about sitting in a chair. It's about being on the deck. It's about interacting with athletes and parents and everybody else who you have to interact with. So that's really going to be my focus tonight. And so I'm going to ask you to participate. I'm going to ask you some questions to throw in the chat. I'm going to ask you to maybe share some of your thoughts. I'm going to ask you maybe to get in a breakout room and talk with each other. But we want to make this fun and engaging, and hopefully our next 45 minutes or so is going to go by really quickly. And that hopefully you will also take away a lot of resources that you can really start to dig a little bit more deeply into some of these concepts. But one of the things that I like to do is really make you think. And so I'm going to ask you a lot of questions that are meant to be a little bit provocative, but to kind of ensure that you've got that beginner's mind a little bit in your and you consider kind of what it is that we do, what privilege we have as coaches, and what responsibility we have to the athletes and the participants that we're working with on a daily basis. So that's going to be the foundation. So I will start by sharing my screen, and let's just start that way. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see that okay. You got it? Okay, cool. So we're going to talk a lot about, the pursuit of mastery in coaching. And so, as again, John mentioned, I have a lot of experience in working with some really fantastic coaches over the years, including obviously the water polo coaching staff, but I have a portfolio of 10 Olympic sports, but also am just a fan of coaching. Truth be told, both of my parents were collegiate coaches. Both of them are in the Hall of Fame for coaching. So it's kind of part of my DNA. So it's really fun to kind of think about things critically, to make observations. And I'm sure many of you who watch sports on TV ask yourself, what would I be doing in this particular situation? I do it all the time. But I also am just a learner in terms of looking at leadership and organizational cultures and things outside the world of sports too, because I think there's a lot of things that we can look at from things outside the world of athletics. So I look at things in the medical world. I look at things in the business, in the military, in the education space, the performing arts, and a lot of other areas as well, to see what are some of the ingredients of some of these exceptional teams. But as we'll talk about tonight, what are some of the characteristics and attributes and behaviors of some of these leaders? And so that's really the lens that I want to kind of work on tonight, is to, kind of think about performance in general, but really hone in on sport performance in particular, just through maybe a broader and more diverse lens. So what I will say is not necessarily that this is going to be a recipe, although I will go through a little bit of a checklist at the end. But that checklist really is a checklist of thinking and not necessarily a checklist of doing, if that makes sense. So you'll understand when we get there. So when I think about coaching, I often go back to some of the great coaches of our time. And as Kareem wrote in his book, if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it, Coach Wooden and Me. He's reflecting on all of the things that Coach Wooden taught him, not only on the basketball court, but in life itself, right? And one of the mantras that Coach Wooden used all the time was, you haven't taught until they've learned. And what that really means is that it's putting all of us at the center of this learning process. So I'm going to ask you kind of, how do you learn, but also how are you engaging your athletes to learn as well? Are you thinking about this in the broader context of learning and creating a learning environment? So, hopefully, again, at the end of today, I'm going to leave you with some thoughts and some strategies and some ideas that you can take away and start to incorporate immediately into your environment. And I'm going to do that by kind of going through three primary sections of discussion. Number one, the first thing I'm going to go through kind of briefly is thinking about our role as leaders and learners. The second part of this is kind of looking at coaching as a performance art. So performing at our best, and what does it mean for us to be a performer as well? And then the last section, which I'll spend most of the time on, is building systems for daily improvement. How do we get better at coaching every single day? So what I want to do, and adjust your volume as necessary, but I'm going to show you a video clip. Many of you may have already seen this, but I'm going to show you a video clip, and I want you to consider kind of what it means. So there was obviously some commentary that went on from the TV host there, the play-by-play and the color analyst, and they made a few comments. But I'm curious in terms of, and please come off mute. This is just an open question. So I'm going to ask you kind of, what did you see? Like, what did you notice about the situation? Where were the coaches? What was written on the whiteboard? The announcer said the coaches have abdicated responsibility. I'm kind of curious what you think about that. So I'm just gonna stop there and just come off mute and kind of, what did you see? And if you've seen that clip before, maybe you've thought about it. If you haven't seen that clip before, I'm kind of curious. So please come off mute and share some thoughts that you might have about what you just saw.
I saw a lot of sort of almost nothing passing the buck. I didn't have any audio, which I guess is what you intended, but everybody just kind of looks out of it.
I observed it as Steve Kerr turning ownership over to the Warriors players and allowing the Warriors players to kind of coach himself. And Steve Kerr might have passed along with the whiteboard some of his experience and allowed the players to kind of break it down on their own.
Okay. Anything
I
else?
had the same impression. I just wasn't sure. I saw what he did, and it looked like he was saying, "Hey," and because I felt myself in the same position. And two things have gotten me there before. One, a little bit of frustration, saying, if you're not going to take the coaching, you do it yourself. It's not the best way, but it's, And then there's the look. You guys, you're going to have to be empowered here, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to learn to lead from within. So I wasn't sure which one he was doing, but I've had both feelings myself.
Good. Okay. Any other comments real quickly?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think what I kind of read from Steve Kerr's body language is confidence. Like, he didn't seem nervous or stressed. He said it was almost like, "Here you go, Draymond, you know what to do."
Yeah. Good. Well, let's see what he did say, because obviously there were a lot of questions about that. In fact, there was a lot of debate in the popular media about that. But let's get a sense of what he said. And he said, it's the players' team. It's their team. They have to take ownership of it. As coaches, our job is to nudge them in the right direction, to guide them. We don't control them. They determine their own fate. I don't think we focused well the last month. It just seemed like the right thing to do. So basically what he was saying was, not basically, it is what he said was, I've put you in a position. We've taught you in the practice environment. We've now reached a situation in the game environment where I feel like this is a good time for you to take ownership of the process. And we are going to step away as coaches and give you the opportunity to kind of talk amongst yourselves and figure out a lot of these things that are going on in the game, because you have the best picture of what's happening out on the field of play. And all Steve wrote on the whiteboard was the 5 players that were going to go in. He gave the board to Andre Iguodala and said, all right, here you go. Here's who's going in. And you kind of lead the players in a discussion about what we're doing next in the game. So it was really interesting. But as you think about that, what I found kind of so profound about that, and again, I'm going to show you some more examples here, was what had to go on in that environment for a very, very long time, day in and day out, for Steve to have the confidence, as you guys have talked about, to actually turn that over to the players. So what was going on in their daily training environment for them to have the confidence to be like, hey, whenever this situation comes up, whenever we're given this opportunity, whatever we're doing out on the floor, it's going to be our responsibility, and we have to figure out how we're going to deal with that particular situation. Okay, so I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. Here's another quote from a very famous rugby coach in England. And he did a podcast very recently where he was talking about his coaching career, and he was talking about some of the 10 greatest lessons he learned. And this was number 1. When he said, once the whistle blows, the people who are in control of what happens next in the game are the ones out on the field. You can be the most magical coach the world has ever seen, but the impact you can have once the game has started is very limited. So again, what he's reflecting on is his time as a master coach is that he felt a responsibility to transform the way he was operating in the daily training environment to one in which he felt as though he were empowering the players to make these decisions on the field to play on their own, because that was the nature of the game. The game itself didn't allow for a lot of coach-player interaction, as many complex invasion sports do not allow that to take place. Yes, you have periodic timeouts and you have periodic stoppages of play, but your view and what the players are seeing is oftentimes very, very different. And so the idea is, what can I do to create a learning environment that is going to put the players in the best position to be problem solvers? How are they going to have to learn how to solve these problems, communicate it with their teammates, try things that might not necessarily work, try other things that might not necessarily work, understand how to communicate back and forth. So all of these things are kind of built into this environment. And if I were to go to kind of a different viewpoint, if I were to look at this from the world of education, here's a really interesting quote that came from a high school in Manchester in the United Kingdom, where they were talking about that from a school standpoint. So rather than kind of this traditional industrial era kind of schooling curriculum, which is based on kind of standard core criteria, and we're going to teach you geometry, and we're going to teach you mathematics, we're going to teach you chemistry, we're going to teach you English, we're going to teach you all these things, and you're going to meet certain standards, and then we're going to throw you out in the world. It was, well, let's think about what the student experience is going to be when they leave us. What are they going to have to do when they leave us? In other words, what's going to happen when they get out of the training environment into the competition environment, which is the real world? And so they flipped it on its head, and they said, we need to think about these students as learners, and we need to think about what skills will they have when they leave here that allow them to adapt to the situations that they see in the competitive arena of life, right? So they said effective learners will be happy and successful in life because they are self-dependent and they can adapt to demanding situations, and they will know what to do when they don't know what to do, which is really about the same thing that we deal with in competition, right? We are often faced with situations that we haven't seen before, opponents that give us a different look. One of our main players isn't available because they've been injured. Somebody gets their 3rd exclusion, and now they're out of the lineup, and I can't rely on them anymore. And so all of these things are going on. How does our team respond to that? And so that kind of necessarily means, how are we thinking about preparing them for those situations? So again, I'm going to give you another video, and I think, and again, give me a thumbs up if you heard, the audio on the last You did not hear it. Okay. That stinks because we tested it before and it seemed like it worked. Nevertheless, we will make an adjustment as we always do. So I was going to show you this video clip.
Not far from where I live is a place called Death Valley. Death Valley is the hottest, driest place in America, and nothing grows there. Nothing grows there because it doesn't rain.
Hello.
Hence Death Valley. In the winter of 2004, it rained in Death Valley. 7 inches of rain fell over a very short period. And in the spring of 2005, there was a phenomenon. The whole floor of Death Valley was carpeted in flowers for a while. What it proved is this, that Death Valley isn't dead. It's dormant. Right beneath the surface are these seeds of possibility, waiting for the right conditions to come about. And with organic systems, if the conditions are right, life is inevitable. It happens all the time. You take an area, a school, a district, you change the conditions, give people a different sense of possibility, a different set of expectations, a broader range of opportunities. You cherish and value the relationships between teachers and learners. You offer people the discretion to be creative and to innovate in what they do. And schools that were once bereft spring to life. Great leaders know that. The real role of leadership in education, and I think it's true at the national level, the state level, at the school level, is not and should not be command and control. The real role of leadership is climate control, creating a climate of possibility. And if you do that, people will rise to it and achieve things that you completely did not anticipate and couldn't have expected.
So that whole discussion there about thinking like a farmer, or creating an environment for these things to grow organically, is about, he was using the relationship between a teacher and a student. We're talking about the same thing between a coach and an athlete, right? So this is about empowering that learning environment to allow for the players to express themselves, given a little bit of guidance and a little bit of flexibility and adaptability in their and an ability for them to think creatively about how to problem solve. So it comes back to, how are we thinking about coaching as a leadership opportunity? How are we thinking about creating a learning environment every day that we go out to the training session? And how are we preparing them for the uncertainty and the chaos of a competitive environment, right? There's a lot of things that we can control in a training environment. There's a lot of things that we can't necessarily control in a competitive environment. So how are we preparing them to navigate all of that uncertainty? So again, I come back to this idea of players play the game. And so what does that mean in terms of our responsibility as a coach? How do the best teams, how do the best coaches, how do the best leaders create this opportunity for players to play the game, for players to be empowered to play the game and make the adjustments on their own, like we saw with Steve Kerr, like we will see with others. So we're thinking about intentionality here, intentionality of our leadership, ways in which we're creating independence with our athletes, ways in which we're challenging them, ways in which we're demanding curiosity and creativity in the way that they problem solve, ways that demand adaptability and resilience to coming back from failure, and to prototype solutions and try them and try them and try them and try them until we find something that works. And then finally, ways in which we teach the game. So that's kind of setting the stage for where we're going to go from here, because now we're going to say, okay, what's our responsibility in doing that? What are some examples of what we've seen in terms of great coaches who have done that? And how might we put together a system where we can practice this day in and day out, so that we see the fruits of our labor and we see the athletes taking more and more ownership of the responsibility for their own development, but also in ways in which we are getting better at creating our own performance as coaches. So that's really the question that I want to throw out here is, kind of what is the best way to improve performance among people who are already trained and on the job? So you all are coaches. you're trained as coaches, you're here this weekend, you're advancing your coaching education, you're thinking about coaching in a critical way, you're thinking about the vertical game as it relates to water polo. And so you're looking at the skill of coaching and how to get better, how to be a better coach each and every day. And so that's not a unique question that we ask of anybody who's in any profession in life. How do we get better doing what we do while we're on the job? And so that's the kind of question that's the foundation of all of our discussion now. So I want to focus in on one part of your role as a coach. And obviously these are some of our great coaches that we've had the opportunity to work with, just two of many, obviously with Adam and the women's team, Don Staley with the women's basketball team, obviously a high degree of success over the course of many quads that we've been through. But, you know, obviously what makes a great coach, we certainly can talk about technical and tactical expertise, right? Knowing the game and all of its component parts. You guys are all skilled in knowing what's involved, what kind of skills and competencies are required in the game of water polo. There's the whole idea of connection and relationships and motivation and communication. So knowing the athletes as people, right? So everybody's not the same. And I know you all have certain athletes that you feel like it's a very easy connection, and some that are a little bit more challenging, and there's not one single way to communicate and connect with all of them. So you have to find different ways to do that. There's the leadership and culture piece, which we've talked about. So kind of building this environment. But today I really want to focus in on this skill of instructional competence, really. So really the skill of teaching, you know, and kind of what does great teaching look like? So if I were to ask you that question, thinking about school teachers that you've had, thinking about coaches that you've worked with, thinking about your own experience as a teacher, again, please come off mute. We've got a relatively small group here. We don't have to go into breakouts, but so what does great teaching look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And what do these great teachers do that really empowers their students or their athletes into this mindset of learning? So again, take a couple minutes, come off mute and kind of share your thoughts. Like, what does a great teacher look like?
John, for me, a great teacher is someone that can show me and not tell me.
Right. Show, not tell. Good. What else? So you're talking about engagement there, right?
Yeah.
They're engaged in their own learning. Yeah.
For me, a lot of times when you want to learn, you like the person you're learning from. So a lot of it has to do with the relationships you build. The more you like the person that's teaching you, the more you're engaged and want to learn what they're saying.
Yeah. So there's a connectivity piece to this. Yeah. Absolutely. Meeting them where they are. Good. Any other thoughts?
Yeah. One of the things, my experience, and I'm most comfortable learning when I'm comfortable in the environment. And for me, a good teacher is the one who makes you feel it's okay to talk. It's okay to give your input. And they've done it by managing everyone else as well. So everyone feels safe around each other. And then on the other side, as a coach, I've been most successful when my team likes each other to the point where they feel comfortable giving input, and no one holds it in or holds back because there are some intimidation factors. You know? So for me, the best coaches and the best teachers are the one who magically make it a safe environment and everyone's comfortable in that environment.
Yeah, great, Mike. I appreciate that. That concept of psychological safety, right, and the ability to give candid feedback, and for the feedback to be meant to be helpful and not demeaning. So that's a really good point. One quick opportunity. Anything else that kind of stands out?
I think the question that's asked, you almost have to decide, well, how do you quantify it, right? Because you could say, well, a great coach is a coach that wins most championships. I disagree with that pretty forwardly. I think it's kind of like almost like Michael Jordan, right? It's how much do you get out of the people around you? So a great coach might, be a coach that he's handed the bottom of the barrel and continues to finish middle of the pack. Like my high school coach in basketball, we never had a massive guy, but you knew every year, Hanford High was going to make it into the playoffs because he was going to make sure that he got everything he could have out of his kids. So if you look at it like result based, I would say there has to be kind of a where do you place above the more or less average if another coach is put in that situation. But I think that kind of more directly, a coach is someone who lights a fire underneath the athlete, right? Maybe you give a lot of answers, but can you get them to ask a lot of questions? And if you can set a fire underneath them to become really excited about playing the game and asking more questions and trying to find more time, if you would, then that is typically an indicator of a good coach as well.
Yeah, appreciate that, Greg. Yeah, it's certainly tapping into their kind of internal motivation to get better and to squeeze out the maximum of their potential. You're exactly right that results don't necessarily reflect all that, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's about what have you done to tap into their internal motivation? Where have you left them in terms of their desire to continue learning and growing and getting better? And how have you excited them for this process, for the entirety of the journey, not just for this season, but are we talking about their career? Are we talking about the rest of their life, right? The great coaches are the ones who you hear being talked about with reverence when I haven't been with that coach for 50 years, but they left such an impact on me, right? Like Kareem talking about Coach Wooden, right? And so really good comments there. I want to share another part of this too, and this gets back to kind of teaching and learning. And this is a picture of John Thompson with Patrick Ewing back in the day, and in the mid 80s when Georgetown was such a dominant force. But in John Thompson's book, before he passed away, he talked about the relationship that he had with Dean Smith at North Carolina. And this was in John Thompson's early days at Georgetown. And he was getting frustrated a lot with, it seemed like his messaging wasn't connecting with the players, and he started to go down kind of a bit of a dark path, and some teachers fall into this too, and maybe some of you have kind of fallen victim to this as well, particularly when you were younger. But you start getting frustrated and you start blaming the athletes for not getting it. You get frustrated. I've told them over and over and over and over again, yet we still keep making the same mistake. Still keep making the same mistake. And John Thompson was talking about this with Dean Smith, and he reflected on the conversation that was kind of the turning point in his career. And he said this. He said, Dean said, as long as you blame yourself and not those kids, you'll be all right. That was one of the most valuable things he ever told me, because when you blame the kids, you're saying they're the problem. When you blame yourself, you keep searching for the answer. And so that's this idea of what are we doing to create an environment where however we have to connect with the athletes, however we have to connect with the students, we're constantly searching for answers that are going to be that connection with those players. And so part of that is this idea about, looking at yourself as a performer, just like we look at athletes as performers. Are you looking at yourself as a performer, and how do you go about assessing your own performance? And so one of the ways we go about doing that, as you're thinking about it right now, is this idea of reflection. Are we creating intentional daily time for us to self-reflect and debrief? How are we doing as coaches in kind of building this environment, right? And as we'll talk about here in a little bit, reflection is a form of retrieval practice, right? And part of learning is about retrieval, right? We're moving things from short-term memory into long-term memory, and we're retrieving them and contextualizing things. And that's how we learn, right? We're trying to move things and use our specific practices, design and teaching and coaching techniques to move things out of short-term memory into long-term memory. And we use reflection and retrieval as a way to ensure that those pathways are a little bit more stable and a little bit more reliable. The second thing we're talking about is exactly why you're on this call today. It's about chasing mastery. So in other words, what sorts of deliberate and intentional practice are you doing? And what feedback are you getting to get better at coaching and teaching? And I'll talk a little bit about how we might go about doing that on a daily basis. 3, is kind of understanding what your standards of performance and standards of behavior are. So as we talked about in some of your comments, what does good coaching and good teaching look like? What's non-negotiable in your role? What is your coaching philosophy? Have you made it known to your team and to your staff? And is it aligned with the philosophy of your school or your club? So have you had that conversation with your athletes to understand the place where you are coming from? And then lastly, kind of how are you approaching self-care? So again, recognizing this idea that you are a performer too, and I want you to think about all of the things that we do in service of the athletes. All of the care that we provide to the athletes in terms of maybe nutrition support, mental health, sleep, scheduling of training and rest times, all of those things that we put in service to the athletes to improve their performance. I would now ask you to turn the mirror on yourself and think, what am I doing? What behaviors am I exhibiting? What practices do I have that are going to allow me to perform at my best as a coach? So we do a lot of talk with that with our Olympic coaches for sure, as we're getting ready for major international competitions, as we're talking about the grind of the year and the quadrennium. How are the coaches taking care of themselves so they can be at their very best when the athletes need them the most? So I'm going to end this section with another short little video clip from Gino Auriemma. As you know, Gino was our Olympic team coach for the London and Rio Games, won consecutive gold medals there for us, but he's a longtime coach at the University of Connecticut. But this is Gino offering his insights on teaching and probably teaching in a way that resonates with a lot of you.
At the post all the time.
One of the advantages that I think we have is that I coached high school. So I know how to coach bad players. Because when you're coaching in high school, you're coaching bad players. You're coaching players that don't know how to play. You have to teach them how to play. So you have to come up with all these different ways to make that bad player a good player. I've coached kids who can't catch, can't dribble, can't pass, and can't shoot. And you have to figure out how to get them to be good.
Do they hate you for it?
Yes. But it's okay. I don't need any 19-year-old friends.
So hopefully that resonated a little bit, especially that part there at the end, right? But he's talking, the idea there is players are on a developmental journey, and wherever you happen to meet them in that developmental journey, there's going to be a next step. And so this responsibility is meeting where they are, and how are we igniting the fire, as Greg talked about before, for their own continued development and for them to be passionate about moving from one level to the next. Yes, they're all not going to be Olympians or Olympic champions or world champions. They might not play from club and high school. They may not play in college, right? But are we creating an environment where they feel like they're getting the best out of themselves, they're enjoying their experience, and every year they come back and they want to be part of your club because you are creating an environment for them to grow and to learn, right? So it was told to me a very, very long time ago. I'll never forget this, that an athlete meets the sport at the coach, right? So if you're an athlete, a 10-year-old kid, and you come to the pool or you come to the gym or you come to the field and you have a bad experience because that coach didn't create an environment for you to have enjoyment, to be challenged, to learn, and to be supported, not only are they likely not going to come back to that sport, but we've seen in very clear data that we have in our Olympic pipeline that they're not coming back to sports at all, regardless of that particular sport. So the value that you have as a coach goes far beyond the X's and O's. It gets back to what kind of environment are we creating and how are we giving athletes the opportunity to blossom and to grow organically in this system. So this is where I want to now start about, well, how do we go about doing that? So this will be the last 15 minutes or so, and hopefully this will give you some ideas that you can then take off into your environment. So here we go. So we did this with some of our Olympic coaches because one of the biggest things that our coaches talk about all the time is I don't have enough time. And in the Olympic world, you know, our life is dictated by a quadrennial schedule, a 4-year schedule. We always know when the next Olympic Games is going to be. We always know when the next World Championships is going to be. And so everything we have is calibrated to that schedule. And so we know, like right now, how many days it's going to be until the gold medal game in the women's water polo competition. We already know. And so we also know the kind of things that we have to get done. And so everybody says, we don't have enough time. We don't have enough time. So I'm going to show you a way for us to get more time without adding any time to your calendar. And so this is the question that we ask a lot of coaches. And we say, in your environment, in your estimate, how much time is being spent on active learning, skill development, feedback, and competitive preparation within each session? Let's say you have a 90-minute session. And then likewise, how much time is being spent on passive knowledge delivery? In other words, the coach talking, you're standing at a whiteboard, the players are talking to each other, discussions, inactivity, right? And so we had the coaches estimate that for us. And I'm sure many of you would probably say, well, in terms of active stuff going on, it's probably about 85, 90% of our time, and probably 10 to 15% of our time is passive. And so what we did was we actually went out with a stopwatch and a pad and paper, and we did a time on task analysis. We just said, all right, we're going to go out to your practice sessions for a week. We're just going to sit in the stands, and we're going to put a stopwatch on everything. And we're going to give you some actual data to demonstrate how much time you are actually doing. So not your estimate, but this is what you're actually doing. And they were agreeable to it because they wanted to know. And so in this one particular sport, I'll just give you an example here. It was actually more of a 60-40 split. 64% where it was spent in this is an average over the course of a week. So I think there was probably 5 to 6 days, probably 10 to 11 sessions over the span of that week. So about 64% was spent in active skill development, learning, feedback, competitive preparation. 36% was actually in passive knowledge delivery, discussion, and inactivity, right? And then we further broke it down and we said, okay, of that 64% of time, how much of that was actually just a warm up? So you're just physically getting prepared to do the session. How much was actually spent in real activities? How much was spent in transition from one activity to the next? How much time was actually spent in instruction? And how much was just time lost because stuff was just going on? And what you can see from that second little graph is that 51% of that time, of the 64%, was actually in practical activities. So what that means is, in a 90-minute session, the players were actually engaged in sporting activities for about 46 minutes of those 90 on average. And then we went a step further and we said, okay, if we were to focus in on this one player, how many repetitions did they get in that overall block of training? And it was minuscule, right? And knowing what we know about athlete skill development, we know that one of the keys to that is how many times do you get to practice that skill with feedback, right? And so if you're imagining minimal numbers of repetitions in this 90-minute training session, and you're doing that over the course of the week, imagine how much time is being lost every 90 minutes that you go up there. And now add that up over the course of a week, add that up over the course of a month, add that up over the course of the year, add that up for the course of 4 years. And what we found was we could actually double the amount of time, the amount of effective time that the coaches and athletes had together without adding any time to their calendar. So it was, again, about this idea of squeezing more out of every session by the intentionality with which we approached that session. Okay, so this is what we're getting to. We're getting to the system of plan, do, review. In other words, what are we doing before we go to the training environment? What are we doing in the planning phase? What kind of deliverables do we have before we go out to the pool deck? And then when we're on the pool deck, how are we executing that training plan? And then when that training is done at the end of that session, how are we reviewing what we just did? And then that learning loop, that review informs what we are going to do the next time. So this is the plan, do, review, learn loop that I'm going to talk about, and its impact on our athletes' ability to take ownership of their training. Right? This is how we started this discussion. So I want you to think about a training session that you're going to deliver the very next time you are with your teams. And we're going to walk through this. Pretty straightforward, but I want you to think about this and how you might use this to your advantage, because it's going to be something that I think could potentially be transformational. So when we talk about the plan phase, this is how we're going to start. We're going to start by establishing learning themes for that session. So as you think about that next session, what are some of the things that you are going to center or anchor your session around? Right? So this is one session. Let's say you're going to do a 90-minute session on Monday. I want you to think about what are the themes that are going to be the foundation for, or the anchor for, that session. And I've just thrown up a couple here. And I'm saying focus your attention on 1 to 3 of those key themes. So it could be 6-on-5 defense, perimeter shooting, offense to defense transition, developing of lower body power, defensive system terminology, managing timeouts, right? So there's all kinds of technical things that we could be working on. There's some tactical things we could be working on. There's some team building things, communication things we're doing, talking about managing the game, thriving in adversity, right? Some mental skills that we could be working on. So what are the things that are going to anchor that session? And if you are revisiting some of those themes, what are some of the previous learning that you've captured from the last time that you've done those sessions that's going to help you to inform how you will approach it the next time? So if you've done 6-on-5 defense and we're revisiting it, what did you learn last time that you did 6-on-5 that will help for the next time that you go back in revisiting that scheme? Whether it was how the drill was designed, how the players executed it, what you were seeing as a common mistake, etc. What did you learn from it last time that you can bring into it to help inform what you're doing this time? So this is setting the anchor, setting the learning themes. And now what we're going to do is align those behaviors to those themes. So now we're going to say, what are the outcomes that we are going to identify? So in other words, at the end of this session, for those themes that we've identified that are the anchors, what are the outcomes that you want your players to be able to exhibit at the end of that session? And I'll talk about how we go about doing that. The second part of that is what performance standards or what level of proficiency do you want your athletes to achieve during that session? They can be effort-based, they can be repetition-based, they can be performance-based. We'll talk about that. And then what activities are you selecting that align to those themes and help support the outcomes and the standards? So for example, when you're thinking about an outcome, what do you want them to be able to do at the end of that session that they weren't able to do at the beginning? So in other words, what does that progress look like? What type of skill are we addressing? Is this a physical skill? Is it a technical skill? Is it a tactical skill? Is it a mental skill? Is it a communication skill? What is the skill type that we're after? And is this a performance outcome, meaning we want them to achieve a specific standard? Let's say we're doing a shooting activity and you want them to be able to hit the upper right-hand corner of the net 7 out of 10 times from a specific position in the pool. Or is it a learning kind of outcome where we're going to challenge them to try something new that they haven't done before and give them feedback so that they're learning and progressing their skill, right? So the simple way of thinking about this is when you think about an outcome, at the end of this session, the athletes will be able to do something at some level of proficiency, right? That's kind of the guiding statement. And the number of outcomes can be relatively short. Like we said, what are the anchoring themes, the big rocks? And now we're talking about the outcomes, and we can have maybe 1 or 2 outcomes at most for each one of those big rocks that you're going to address in the session. And then the standards basically are identifying that level of proficiency. And now the activities are going to be aligned with what it is that we're trying to get done. So again, what activity is going to allow us to move from our current level of performance to a desired level of performance? So if we're revisiting an activity that we've done before, how are we making this activity different that's going to stretch the athlete's capability a lot? We're not just going to go back and revisit something, but we're going to go back and revisit something and enhance it in a degree that we didn't see before. So this helps to enhance our learning. Why are we doing this activity and what's its transferability into the game? How does it relate to the game? Again, are we matching the demands of the competitive environment with what we are doing in training? What's the transferability of this activity to the game environment? When we think about how long is it going to take for us to achieve the outcomes that we've put, again, how many reps is it likely to take and how much time is it likely needed to achieve the outcome? We might not get it done in one session. We might need 50 sessions to get to the outcomes that we want, but what is the next step that we can take in building this outcome? We're moving from simple to complex in terms of the activity design, right? Simple so that everybody understands exactly what's doing, and then we start to add in additional cognitive interference in game-like situations to make it a little bit more complex, to make sure the skill starts transferring into game-like environments. Again, the type of practice design that we're looking at and the advantages and disadvantages of each. So if it's something new that we're doing, maybe a blocked practice design where we're doing things over and over to introduce this new skill so they start to see it a little bit, might be the way that we introduce the skill. But as we start to advance, maybe we start doing an interleaving session where we leave that skill, go do something else, and then come back to that skill to see how much learning is taking place. Then we might move from there into a random design where we're going to add some more chaos from which this skill is part of that chaos. Again, game-like situation. The other thing I'll say is if you're doing a lot of activities and you repeat them quite often, which I know many of you do, name that activity. That shortens the communication that's required. So if you're doing a particular 6-on-5 drill and you're working on 6-on-5 defense, let's just call that particular activity that we're going to do H-bomb. I don't know. It's just something that just came to mind, H-bomb. And so anytime you say we're going to do H-bomb, everybody knows that means we're going to do 6-on-5. It's going to be a defensive thing, and we know how to get set up. We know what the constraints are, and you can say today we're going to do H-bomb, but we're going to have a player at X5 do this instead of what they did last time, or we're going to have a player at X4 do this, or we're going to move from H-bomb, which is 6-on-5, to H-bomb -1, which is 6-on-5, moving into 6-on-4 because somebody got excluded, right? I'm just naming it because that cuts down on the communication time that's necessary for you to talk about this activity. You don't have to say, okay, we're going to 6-on-5. I want you guys to line up. Remember how we did this last time. You're going to be here. 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 That takes up a lot of time. If we can shrink it down and name it and the players understand it, now we can just use these words and players understand exactly what we're talking about. And then the last thing I will say is when you think about these activities, anticipate the most common errors that you've seen when people are executing this stuff. So when it comes time to give feedback, you can start to contextualize it for the whole team. And you can say, when it's time, let's say you go through 5 reps or 10 reps and you're seeing a common mistake, at the end of those 5 or 10 reps, the feedback that you give can be feedback that you've seen and you've prepared for. So you can actually prepare feedback strategies in advance. So when I see them doing this, when I've seen this happen before, I can give them feedback. I kind of know how to respond. It's kind of like a pre-canned response, but you've anticipated how you're going to give that feedback. So again, that's taking away this hole that a lot of coaches fall into when they want to give feedback, which is great, but then they go down the rabbit hole of giving too much feedback about too many things, and it's not related to what we were talking about in the activity that we're doing there. So it's really focused feedback, and it's anticipating the feedback. The next thing I'll talk about is roles and responsibilities. Like, what's everybody's role in delivering this session? Most of you probably work solo, or maybe you have somebody else who's assisting you. You probably don't have a large staff. If you do, that's great. I'll talk about it. If you don't, this is where, again, you define how are we going to deliver the session, and then how are we going to execute the session? Who's responsible for delivering what? And then if you have an activity plan, like if you have a sheet or you have a script or something, that it's done well in advance of you going out on the pool deck, because it's going to help you guide what's happening out in the session. So if you happen to have multiple people, again, think about the best way to deploy those people on the pool deck. So what's the head coach going to do? Maybe the head coach sits back and lets the assistant coaches do more of the technical teaching, and the head coach wants to get an overall picture of this, right? What is going to allow for the coaches to be the most effective? If you've got other support staff there, if you've got volunteers there, if you've got parents there, if you've got spectators there, even talking to your athletes and athletes who might be injured, how are they going to be engaged? What's their role and responsibility? Again, making sure that they understand exactly how this is going to go. Remember, this is all part of the planning phase. We haven't even gotten out to the pool deck yet. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, wow, this is a lot of stuff. But when you get into it and start doing it on a regular basis, this can take 10, 15, maybe 30 minutes tops for you to get through this. And the amount of time that it's going to save you in the field of play is going to be immeasurable, right? Because you're taking a lot of that stuff and a lot of that uncertainty out of the execution of the training plan, and you're putting it into the planning phase where you've got more brain power to put towards it. Instead of thinking on the pool deck about what am I going to do next? Wait a second, what is the next exercise we're doing? And oh my gosh, I forgot what we're doing from here, right? We've all been there before. Instead, it's like, I know exactly what I'm doing. After this period ends, I'm going to move on to this next period, and I know exactly how we're going to transition. So it allows you to be more present as the coach, is what I'm getting at. And then the last part of this is checking for understanding. So if you have a coaching and support staff, you can kind of go through a little bit of a briefing. You can say, okay, here's our themes for the day. Here's the outcomes we're trying to get. Here's the performance standards for those outcomes. Here's what our activities are going to be. And this is the run of order of how we're going to do things. And here's what I need for you guys to be doing. Okay, Jack, I need you to be working with the goalkeepers for the 15 minutes. Then I want you to come back with me. I want you on my hip when we're doing the 6-on-5, because I want another set of eyes on the defense, right? And then if you've got a parent over there, or if you've got some injured athletes or something, where do you want them? How do you want them to understand what's going on? Then you're going out and setting up the training environment, again, so that the transitions are easy, so that the equipment is set up, the goal cages are set up where they need to be if they're on the sides of the pools or the ends of the pools. You've got lane lines, touch lines, you've got balls positioned where they need to be. They're all in good working order. You've got hip belts, any other things that you need for physical training, whatever, they're all set up in the right position. Training environment is set. Then you can go and kind of give the athletes a bit of an overview. If you've got a whiteboard, this is a great opportunity to have a whiteboard where all this stuff is laid out, and you just go through a 90-second little summary. You're not going into detail, but you're saying, hey guys, here's what we're doing today. Here's the main themes that I want to focus on. These are the outcomes that we're looking for. These are the standards that you'll need to be in terms of execution. This is really what we're looking for in terms of effort or performance or learning. And here's how the practice is going to go. And that's all you need to do. And so everybody kind of has a general idea of how things are going to go. And if there's something that you want to rehearse, maybe do a bit of a walkthrough, maybe you're introducing a new concept that they haven't seen before, this is an opportunity for you to do it in a non-threatening environment where you can actually walk them through on the pool deck. So we're going to do this new drill today. You haven't done it before, but let's get together on the pool deck, and I'm going to walk you through exactly how this is going to work. Again, that gives them the opportunity to see it, to feel the rotations. It's a non-threatening environment. They can ask questions, and they really understand exactly what's going to be expected. So when they get to that new drill in the water, they've already walked through and they kind of have an idea about how this is all going to unfold, right? So here's just an example of that in a volleyball environment. But as you can tell, if you were to walk in as a player, you can see exactly what is going to go on over the course of that training session, right? You see the big rocks up at the tight top right-hand corner. Those are the big themes that we're talking about. You see the quote of the day, right? Focus on running the race, not winning it. Back to this, setting up this environment about we're creating a learning environment here. You can see the order of activities, and you can also see exactly where they're going to be positioned. You actually see maps of where the players are going to be positioned on the court, so they know exactly where they're going to be. You can also see, if you look really, really closely, the initials there of all the coaches and where they are going to be positioned. So like NRS, JX, LS, KK, you know, those green boxes that you see by the courts, those are actually the coaches. So the players and the coaches know exactly where they're going to be. The things in red are the performance standards. So that's what we are trying to get from each of the player groups out of each one of those activities. And you can see it starts very simply with receiving and setting and warming up, and receiving, setting, and blocking and serving and blocking. And then it starts to get more and more complex until period number 7 is compete. Again, that's seeing, are we transferring the learning into the performance environment? The other thing that you see where it says my focus this week is this idea of socialized goal setting, right? So every one of those things is a player who's identified exactly what I'm going to work on that week. So everybody can see it, and all of their peers can give them feedback about how they're progressing on what they're doing. So they're socializing their goal setting. It's not just about them and the coach, it's about them and the team. And the thing I also want to point out is at the very bottom, you probably can't see it. It's very subtle. At the very, very bottom, there's a KK there, and it says faster quizzing. Well, again, that is the coach, in fact, the head coach of this program, saying, what I'm working on this week is I want to be faster quizzing as a coach. So he's also modeling this behavior, right? So this is the planning phase. So this has all happened before the players have even showed up, right? And so now think about the athlete's mindset in terms of where my focus is, knowing exactly what it is that I'm going to be expected to do over the course of the next 90 minutes or 2 hours or however long we take. I also want to put you in the coaching mindset of what that allows you to be freed of, so that every one of these periods, you can be fully focused on delivering what you need to deliver during the time that you've set, right? So it's about being present as a coach. So now let's move from the planning phase to actually doing it. And this is where coaches love being coaches. This is actually doing what we like to do as coaches, right? And so it's a very simple loop where each one of those activities that you laid out, now we get to go into a little bit more detail, and we get to say, okay, folks, we're going to do activity number 1. It's going to be the H-bomb 6-on-5 defensive focus. Here are the constraints that I'm going to add to it. We're going to do this for 10 minutes. This is what I need in terms of the setup. And you can start checking for understanding with the players. So you can say, Jody, what's your responsibility as an X5 if we're in down man defense? What's your responsibility if they're going to run this pattern of play? So you're checking for their understanding. On offense, what are you trying to do? What's the big concept that we're trying to run? Okay, we're going to try to spread the water a little bit, start to create some holes and start to create some gaps. Okay, if they start doing that at the X4, what is your responsibility, right? So this is how you start checking for understanding and engaging them in the process, right? Instead of asking the universal coaching question, does everybody get it? And everybody nods their heads. And in the first 2 minutes, it all starts looking terrible, right? So don't rely on self-report from the athletes. Always use checking for understanding, targeted questioning to make sure they understand stuff. Have them talk back to you, or as it was talked about from one of the coaches earlier, show me. So if I'm at X5, show me how I'm going to move out to the perimeter. If I'm at X4, show me how I'm going to move up to the center. Show me where you're going to go. That now starts to get, now we're actually able to start giving corrective feedback initially before the activity even starts. Now we go into the activity, we start executing on it, we start giving feedback, we start doing the stuff that we love to do. And this is the one thing that I think a lot of coaches fail to do, but is so rich in learning that if you took 30 seconds to a minute at the end of each activity, it is so rich to bring these concepts home to your athletes. And that is debrief the activity. And a simple debrief is, what did you experience? What did you see out there? What went well? What didn't go so well? So if we did this the next time, what would you do differently, right? Get the athletes to talk about that experience and listen and note and write down what it is that they told you, because they are telling you exactly what their experience was. And they're also giving you insight about what they'll need next time to learn it better. But what it does is it solidifies the learning. Again, it's this idea of reflection as a form of retrieval. So they're going back into their experience. They're really engaging their learning pathways between short-term memory in these last 10 minutes and long-term memory that I'm going to draw upon for the rest of my water polo career, right? And debriefing is a way for them to reflect and to talk about what their experience was like. Again, 30 seconds to a minute tops. That's it. Then you move on to the next transition. So one of the best ways to do it is when you come over to the side of the deck and you do a water break. So while they're getting their water for that 30 seconds or 1 minute or 2 minutes, you have that conversation. What happened? How did it go? Do you think we met our mark? If you did, what went well and what helped? If we didn't, why didn't we do it? And what are we going to do about it next time? And then we move on to the next activity. And then we brief the next activity. We ask checking for understanding. We execute it. We debrief it again. So again, this allows you to be in the moment. You're really setting up the environment. They really understand what's going on. You're engaged in the teaching and learning. You're engaged in the feedback. They're engaged in their own learning. They're engaged in their own reflection and debriefing. And we're really setting up a learning environment. So again, just some guiding questions about the execution. Again, how many repetitions are we likely to have in that period? You know, if we're in a learning phase, you can come back to them and say, we've just started this process and we're going to keep coming back and we're going to start adding more and more repetitions. How much time are we spending on the task? What kind of feedback are we giving? What's the type of feedback that we're giving and the frequency that we're giving it? Who is delivering it? Again, this gets back to roles and responsibilities. Again, directed questioning, open-ended questioning, getting the athletes to speak for themselves. And the directed questioning, and a very simple directed questioning technique, is asking something of the group and then calling out at the end of that question a player's name. So let me give you an example of directed questioning. So as I look at the group, as I look at this group, I can say, hey, Jake, what did you think about this last session? Right? So I asked Jake a question. I'm not asking you to answer the question. I'm just using this as an example. I say, Jake, what did you think about that session? When I say Jake's name at the start of a question, what's likely going to happen is the rest of you say, whoo, he didn't call on me, and I check out. The simple way of turning that around is to say, what did you think about this part of the session? And then you wait 5 seconds. Jake. So I'm preparing everybody to answer that. They all have to think, well, I could be called on here. So I'm going to have to be engaged and I'm going to have to think about it. And I'm going to say, I'm going to ask a question, wait a little bit, and then say, Jake. And Jake's going to give me a response. And then I'm going to say, Michael, what'd you think about that? Or I'm going to say, what did you think about Jake's response? Michael. See the difference? So it's about keeping the athletes engaged even when you're asking them questions. So just that simple technique of putting their name at the end as opposed to the beginning is a way to do targeted questioning that ends up being a little bit more effective and keeps all of the athletes engaged because they might be called upon and doesn't give them a bit of a break. And then the last thing I'll talk about when we're here is about this idea of progressions, right? As we move through moving from taking pieces and building it into the whole, right? So we start talking about when we're doing this particular skill, let's say we're working on offhand passing. So I'm a right-handed player, but I'm going to work passing on my left side. I'm going to keep coming back to that. As I start to master that skill, now I start putting it into different contexts, right? So now maybe in one of the drills that you're doing, one of the constraints is you can only pass with your left hand, right? And so now I'm engaging my system, my motor system and my cognitive system in a very different way. And the constraint is when I'm doing this particular activity, I can only use my left hand. So now I start to see, I start to add more complex elements to this fundamental skill, eventually getting to the point where we're building bilateral players, right? They might be right-handed dominant, but we've worked so well on the left hand or the offhand that now they're skilled in passing, shooting, catching with the offhand, that we've opened up so many more possibilities to that skill set. So hopefully that makes some sense. And I'm going to finish this off by the review phase. So we talked about the plan phase on the front end. We talked about executing the session. And now we're going to talk about what we do when the session is over. Again, accelerating the learning here. So before we leave the session, before the session is over with, again, we call the session, we're ending it on time, and we say, that was a great session. Come on over, let's spend 2 minutes talking about that session. Training session debrief with the team on the field of play. So while they're still on the pool, now we can go back and use all of those things that we anchored the session and reflect on it. So in today's session, we were talking about 6-on-5 defense, and we set up the objective that we were going to do X, Y, and Z. How did we do? Zach, how did we do? Mike, what do you think about that? What do you think about Mike's comment? John, right? So now we're getting them engaged. We're getting them to reflect on their own performance. We spend a little bit of time anchoring that learning. We take note of what they said, because that's going to inform what we do the next time, or when we come back to some of those activities at a later date. Then you dismiss the athletes. And then if you have time with, I'm not going to say if you have time, when the athletes leave, now spend some time with those people who delivered that session and now reflect on your own performance. So how did we organize it? How do we deliver it? What challenges did we come up with? We took too long on this particular drill. We went 5 minutes over and we could have stopped it a little bit sooner. I didn't give the best feedback I could have. Next time I'm going to do this. Next time when we set up the session, instead of having the goals on the side and having the players do it, we'll position it while they're completing their warm-up. I'm just throwing stuff out there. But this is where you start talking about how did you deliver the session? And what did you learn as a reflection on that session, right? How did you reflect on your own performance? You capture all that learning, and then that is going to go into kind of the next session, right? The thing I have under the line here is this training session debrief, if you want to go more in depth. So if you have individual meetings, if you have a team meeting, like you're going to do a review, maybe you videotape that session and you want to go review some of the video clips. That would come later, right? That's after you've done your pool, after you've done your debrief, after the players have left, and maybe they're coming in for a coaching session or a video session a couple hours later, right? So I will make this available to you all, but I have it all in a checklist. So again, this checklist is not meant to be comprehensive, and it's not meant to be kind of the stepwise thing, but this lays out training, organization, and delivery, and just gives you a tool to say, have you thought about these things? So before you go out and you execute the session, have you thought about all the elements of the plan phase? When you go out and execute it, are you going back to brief, execute, debrief? And then after the training is over, are you debriefing on the field of play? Are you debriefing the coach and the coaching staff? Are you reflecting on your own performance and capturing that learning? Again, that is the learning loop, so that every single session that you do on the pool, in the classroom, every session becomes a learning opportunity for you, becomes a learning opportunity for the athletes, and every session builds on itself. So that ultimately the players get used to this, they get used to speaking up, they get used to being asked questions, they get used to giving critical feedback, both to the coach as well as to their peers. And so when they get into the heat of the competition, this is not something new. It's been something that's been trained and ingrained every single day they've been in the pool. So that's where I talk about this idea that this leads to the ownership that we talked about at the very beginning, right? This isn't a new piece of technology. This isn't a shiny new object. This isn't a nutritional supplement. This isn't a new, training technique. This is just about understanding the foundational elements of teaching and learning and how people learn, and just doing it time and time and time again. And that's where all of these pathways are going to be developed, and the players are going to get really good at retrieving all of this stuff. They're going to be able to contextualize all of these things. And like we saw from that school, when they face something that they've never seen before, they're going to be much more equipped to deal with that uncertainty than they ever have. They're not going to be looking over at you saying, what do I do now? It's more like, we get together as a team. This is the picture that I saw, and this is what I think we need to do. Let's go out and do it. So that's what you saw with Steve Kerr. This was all going on in the background. So when it came time for him to hand the grease board over to Andre Iguodala, that had been so ingrained in that environment that it was like, we're going to take this on. So I went on a little bit longer, but as you can see, it gets me all fired up. I'm sweating, but that's what happens when you talk about coaching and you love what you do. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful. I will send this document to John so he can send it all out to you guys, but feel free to use it and customize it to your own environment. That's what it's intended to be, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of structure. And again, some of these resources that I talked about, I've got hundreds and hundreds more. Happy to share those as well. So I'll shut up and I'll send it back to you, John. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John, JC. That was, I think I'm a little speechless. I think Drew is too. We were just texting on how powerful this is. A lot of information. Do we have time for questions at all? Can we
Sure.
send some your way?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for John?
John, I have a question for you. My name is Jake. I'm a first-time head coach and starting a pretty new club out of Salt Lake City, Utah. So, as you look, this is a lot of really great information. How do we take this into like a crawl, walk, and then run approach?
I would just come back to some simple questions. And that is, as you are a new head coach, the only question that I have for you is, what are you doing to prepare the environment? How are you executing in that environment? And what are you doing to review what you've done? That's it. So you don't have to put all of these elements into practice straight away. It's like, just practice. Whenever you put a training session together, just practice identifying what are the major themes that I'm trying to address here, and break them down into really simple terms. Like, one of the themes is I'm going to develop the physical capability of the athletes. That's going to be one of the themes. So that's going to be like, we're going to work on energy system development, right? So this is your swim sets, right? We're going to work on lower body power. So we're going to work on the egg beater. And we're going to do it maybe with a little bit of resistance. We're going to work on body posture, right? But that's all aligned to this theme of physical development. And maybe another theme is just going to be technical skill development. And some of the outcomes that you're going to be doing with technical skill development might be, we're going to work on just simple passing techniques, simple catch techniques, pass, move, catch, right? Just get in the habit of starting to create anchors around which the players understand what it is that they're going to be doing. And as you start to get more and more comfortable with that, then start adding, okay, well, what are the outcomes that I want the players to be able to complete at the end of a session? So if I have a theme of physical development, one of the outcomes might be, I want them to be able to swim a 4x200 with 30 seconds rest in X amount of time. There's your performance standard, right? That's an outcome, right? Or I want them to be able to maintain a vertical posture with a 5-pound weight belt using an egg beater for 45 seconds, right? And so now we start developing outcomes and performance standards. Then you start saying, okay, well, what are the activities that are going to allow me to align to that, right? So that's the crawl, walk, run approach. It's like, ask yourself the question, what am I doing to prepare? Second question, how am I going to execute this? What's going to be needed to execute this? Third question, what am I going to do to review the athlete's performance and my performance? What am I going to do to capture that learning? And then I'm going to do it again the next session that I have. Start small and build, and then grow from there. That help?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question. It's kind of ancillary. When we saw the best examples of what you were saying, you had a head coach that had become organized, and he had a staff, especially when we looked at the volleyball example, and it was obvious that the assistant coaches had professionalized and were bought in. So if I can back that up to the new club level or the high school level, where as a head coach, we're educating ourselves over time. We've developed some of these systems. We know their work. My personal experience is it's difficult depending on your pool of talent for your assistant coaches.
Sure.
Do you have, is your assistant coach a 19-year-old? Is he a 22-year-old? Are they non-professional? Not to be derogatory, but are they non-professionalized? And how effective are you at? You understand what you want to integrate. You may be an older coach, been coaching for a while, but you have to understand there's some limitation to your coaching staff and how they're going to work on integrating these techniques that you want to bring along. And I guess my question would be, and I'm sure everyone's dealt with it, is I would be interested in some techniques for doing a good job of bringing the young assistant coaches along and professionalizing them into saying, you're not just, you didn't get out of college, you're not just to practice to jump in the water and practice with the guys, but we actually have a coaching system. You need to participate at that level. Do you have any insight you can share with me on that?
Sure do. And you saw it, you saw it on the checklist, right?
Yep.
The first thing is being really clear about roles and responsibilities. Yes, everybody is on a different level in their coaching journey, for sure. There are some that have never coached before that are volunteering, and there's others that are fully licensed international experienced coaches, for sure. However, one of the things that I think is really, really important is when you establish very clear roles and responsibilities, and you allow, and you are clear in what it is you want them to do, what you are saying is, I'm putting you in the best position for you to be successful, but I'm also putting you in a position for all of us to be successful. So as the head coach, one of my responsibilities is developing you as an assistant coach. And by developing you, as we start, let's say you're new, this is what I want you to do. This is your role and responsibility for now, right? You're going to help me with the planning. You're going to give me back some feedback when I talk about some of these drill designs. You're going to talk him or her through why you've chosen these activities and why you've done this stuff. You're helping him or her to learn. And then during the execution or during the setup, you're saying, this is what I need for you to help us execute this plan. This is what I need for you to do in terms of equipment. This is where I need for you to position the equipment, so on and so forth. And when we execute this particular activity, maybe it's just, I want you to watch from behind the cage. And when we debrief later, I want you to give me a sense of what you saw, right? I just want your set of eyes to tell me what you saw. I don't necessarily need you to give me any feedback right now, but I want you to help me with being another set of eyes behind the cage. And I want you to tell me what you saw. And when you, at the end of the training session, when you get to that point where it says athlete debrief on the field of play, and then the second one is coaching team debrief, that's where you close the loop up and you say, okay, what did you see out there? What were some of the things, or what are some of the questions that you have coming out of that? Here's what I was thinking. Here's what I saw, right? So it now becomes an opportunity for you to integrate this person in, to coach them along, to use them in a way that's best for you and best for the team, but also in a way that's going to give them experience in a very graded way with your direction as they continue to develop. So if I were to look at this over the course of a year, maybe in preseason training or right when club season starts, this new assistant coach is going to have relatively restricted duties and responsibilities because you want them to observe the whole system. And maybe you want them to work with one or two players because that was the position that they played and they've got a lot of insight, right? So you kind of limit their role and responsibility, and you're very clear about that, because I think that's where a lot of coaches get into trouble, is they don't give a very clear guidance to what they want out of their coaches. So I think that's number one, is to be really, really clear about what it is you want them to do. And then number two is how are you bringing them along in this debrief? How are you bringing them along after each of the activities? What kinds of conversations are you having? And over the course of that season, you start adding more and more opportunities for them to take on more and more responsibility. So in the middle of the season, maybe they're doing a little bit more of the planning with you because they understand your system a little bit better. Maybe they're providing a little bit more feedback for you because you understand that they know, like if they're working with the goalkeepers, they've got a really good eye for what the goalkeepers are doing, and they're going to give more and more feedback. So you start giving them more and more responsibilities so that by the end, they're starting to do a lot more than they did at the beginning. I want you to take that mindset, at least my recommendation would be to take the same mindset with that coach as you have with the athlete. At the end of the year, what do you want that coach to be able to do then, as opposed to when they came in for you at the beginning of the year? That make sense?
Yeah, that's actually, I was able to capture that. Luckily, it's contextual because we live in that environment. So it's easy to apply what you're saying to the experiences we've already had. So those are great notes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. But again, that checklist, the cool thing about it is the checklist can go from a micro level, meaning a daily session, to a macro level, right? So you can actually develop a seasonal plan from that checklist, right? So you can go in and you can say, okay, what are my big themes for this year? Like, who do we want to be as a team? What are the things that define us, right? This is our playing philosophy. We want to be fast. We want to be physical. We want to be whatever, adaptable. Those are our big rocks, right? And then we say, all right, well, what did we learn from last season about these big rocks? And then we take all the learning from last season, we contextualize it. We say, you know what? We were pretty physical last year, but we could use a little work on something. Players didn't adapt too well to unknown situations. So we need to build in more of that into our training. We need to build in stuff in the training where we're not giving them the answer, where they have to figure it out on their own. We're building adaptability that way, right? So that's the previous learning part of the checklist. And then we say, all right, based on those three giant rocks that we talk about that are defining who we are as a team, then we say, all right, well, what are the outcomes that we want to have this year? Again, not win-loss. That's going to take care of itself. But the outcomes what kind of outcomes do we want to have that says we were a physical team? What outcomes do we want to have that says we were an adaptable team? What outcomes do we want to have that we were a skillful team, right? And that could be one or two statements. And then we can talk about performance standards, like what standard of performance does that mean? Like what level of proficiency do we want to be at, right? So now we're establishing an annual plan based on all the same concepts. So now the activities become blocks of training. So how are we going to align our blocks of training that meet those outcomes, right? And so everything starts to get aligned, and then your daily practice plan aligns to what part of the season you're in. If we're in the first block of training where we're going to do a lot of physical work, then guess what? Our daily training plan is going to have a lot of stuff about physical development, right? So it matches together. So you can do an annual plan based on it, because part of the annual plan is reviewing what you did the year before, right? You've planned it, you executed it, now you're reviewing it. So anyway, the coolness thing I think about is just the simplicity of it, but it can be applied in so many different ways. From the daily training session plan to how you're doing it. Let's say you do a video session, and instead of being a pool session, you're going to do a video session. And most video sessions I've seen from the unskilled or relatively lowered skilled coaches is that they bring their team in and they just watch the whole video. Like they relive the entire game. And of course you lose people really quickly. So the question is, what's the theme of the video session? What are we going to focus on? What are the video clips we're going to use? What is the key learnings that we're going to have, right? So it follows exactly the same thing. So instead of having an hour and 15-minute video session where we just watched last night's game and we picked apart everything and there's no direction to it. It's like, no, we're going to look at 4 of our most successful 6-on-5 defensive plays, and we're going to look at 2 that weren't so successful. And we're going to engage the players in why were they successful, and then we're engage the players in why we weren't successful, because it aligned with the training that we did in this past month, because that was a big theme for us, 6-on-5 defense, right? Now everything's aligned back to what we were before. So it might be a 15-minute video session with 4 positive clips and 2 opportunity clips, and we're out, and the athletes learn exactly what it is that they need to do, right? And they're engaged in the entire process. And this is where you go back to your questioning, right? And you say, why were we so successful? Let's look at X5. Hey, X5 did an awesome job here. What did she do that made her successful? Right? And then we compare and contrast. Let's look at this where we gave up a goal. X4, remember, what are the key responsibilities for X4? JP, right? And JP asked, right? Again, they're all engaged in this process. And it also informs then what are we going to do next time we get back into training, right? So it's all aligned again. So I just want you to think about, I know it's a lot. And again, I could talk till midnight about one small aspect of the checklist. And I'm sure you guys would just be like, oh my God, shut the hell up. But anyway, I want you to think about this in terms of how could it be applied from a very simple way to start, and then slowly add some more and more of the elements, trial it for a period of time, see how you respond, see how the athletes respond, and adjust accordingly. It's all part of your learning process as well.
John, can't thank you enough.
Who's buying the pizza?
Yeah. So we keep it going.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so again, I love talking about this stuff. Again, I'm gonna send John the checklist. Actually, I could probably put it in the chat right now. Would that be easier?
Yeah, let's do both in case we miss it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat right now so you can download it. Let me go to my coaching stuff. Training.
And while you're doing that, JC, we'll just remind everybody kind of the stuff that Drew was talking about in the beginning. We'll see you all in the morning at the pool. Arrive somewhere between 8:30 and 9, so we can get you in the pool, and we'll walk over to the classroom so we can start at 9 o'clock. Yeah, so ideally we're getting there before 9, so we can get over there, and we'll have we'll walk you over there, and we'll be ready to go. So come prepared, and remember you got to check in through the bring ID to check in through the military base and all those things, and we'll see you guys in the morning. Yeah.
Okay. See if you got it. You got it?
Yes, sir.
There you go. It's PDF, so you can take it right there. Yeah. Use it. Try it. Adjust it. It's yours. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, JC. Well, it's a good place to stop, and we'll we appreciate all your all the guidance and the input, and we'll certainly have you back again. And I'm glad that we were recording this and we're sharing it. But and thank you again to everybody for coming tonight. And we'll keep this long weekend of learning. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me, and thanks for looking to get better. It always makes me happy.